So this week we have a number of difficult poems. That's pretty much what you'd expect when we have some of these forms. The ode tends to be a difficult form. So does the dramatic monologue. And elegies can also be difficult. Ballads tend to be easy, songs tend to be easy. Epics are just too big to deal with in any great detail. That's why I only have less than 100 lines of an epic for you. But some of these forms are hard. Now, I don't intend to be talking a lot about form itself because I've said pretty much all I have to say in the written lecture. I want to deal with what the poems are actually saying and maybe why some of them are difficult. So I'll start with the ode. We won't go through the entire poem, but I'll try to get you started with it. So what's difficult about the ode? Well, it's a public document in a serious voice. It's a lyric poem, meaning that it speaks the perspective of the writer. It's not a dramatic poem. It's not a narrative poem. It's a lyric poem. It's a public poem. In this case, it is trying to assess the career of a living politician / military leader, Oliver Cromwell. So all of his audience knows who Oliver Cromwell is. We often don't. He's an important figure. He's the leading figure, in fact, in the English Civil War of the 1700s. Marvell is trying to take a nuanced position in regard to a very controversial figure. And you can think of someone like Donald Trump today. And Cromwell and Trump have virtually nothing in common other than the fact that they are both very controversial, polarizing figures. Marvell, in fact, got into a little bit of trouble over this poem because he did not show sufficient support for Cromwell. But he doesn't want to either give unconditional support or unconditional condemnation, but assess the situation and put the best possible spin on it. So let's look at just what he said in these very formal stanzas. The forward youth, excuse me, that would appear must now forsake his muses dear, nor in the shadows sing his numbers languishing. So the suggestion that he's a forward youth, he's coming into the public before his time. And he has to give up his desire to be a poet. He has to forsake his dear muses. And he cannot stay in obscurity in the shadows and just do his art. He has to go forward, and he has to let his numbers languish. Numbers is a synonym for poetry. It may seem odd to you that numbers is a synonym for poetry, but in fact, that's because traditional poetry requires an awful lot of counting. Counting meter, counting the lines, counting the stanzas, and so this becomes a standard synonym for poetry. His time to leave the books in dust and oil the unused armor's rust, removing from the wall the corslet of the hall. He's got to leave his books, his solitary pursuits behind, and become a soldier. So restless Cromwell could not cease in the inglorious arts of peace, poetry, but through adventurous war urged his active star. So he's restless. He's going to try to become famous and successful through war, not through poetry. And like the three-forked lightning, first breaking the clouds where it was nursed, did through his own side his fiery way divide. So he becomes a soldier. He breaks out like lightning from a cloud and clears the way before him in military fashion. For 'tis all one to courage high. 'Tis all one means it doesn't matter. It's the same either way. 'Tis all one to courage high, the emulous or enemy. Right? So those who want to follow you, who emulate you, or those who want to oppose you, doesn't matter. You're going to move out among all of them. And with such, to enclose is more than to oppose. Right? To bring them in is more than to oppose them. Then burning through the air he went, and palaces and temples rent. He knocked down palaces and temples. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but he did conquer through England with his army in the Civil War. He was the head of the anti-royalist Puritans, and he didn't literally knock down palaces, but he defeated Charles the Second. No, Charles the First. Excuse me. He defeated Charles the First. And temples, he defeated the Church of England and set up his Puritan alternative, the High Church of England. And Caesar's head at last did through his laurels blast. Right? Caesar is Charles the First in this case. 'Tis madness in us, the people who have to come to terms with this coup d'etat led by Cromwell. 'Tis madness to resist or blame the face of angry heaven's flame. Right? So should we resist this man? Should we blame him? It doesn't make any difference. Obviously, God is behind this figure. In the context of English literary history, that doesn't mean God likes him or that he's a good person, only that there's work to be done, and God has chosen him to do it. So he's a force with supernatural support. And if we would speak true, much to the man is due. So these lines, I'm sure Cromwell was very happy to hear. These lines, not so much. And if we speak true, much to the man is due. It's a compliment, but it's a very faint compliment. And it's very different to say much to the man is due than to say he's doing great things. He's really a great man. No, we owe him a lot. That's all it says. Much to the man is due who from his private gardens, where he lived reserved and austere, right? We're back to this first notion, as if his highest plot to plant the bergamot, which is the tasty ingredient in Earl Grey tea, could by industrious valor climb to ruin the great works of time and cast the kingdoms old into another mold, another shape. Right? So he went from obscureness, from gardening, from poetry, to rework the kingdom, to come up with a whole new shape for kingdom. And he did. He overthrew a monarchy and became he became a regent and eventually a dictator. Through justice, though justice against fate complain and plead the ancient rights in vain, but those do hold or break as men are strong or weak. And so you might say he did unjust things, and so we might complain he massacred this people or that people, or committed this war crime or that crime. We might complain, but it was fate. It was uncontrollable. Someone was going to do it. He's the one who came to do it. The system was essentially corrupt, and someone had to destroy it. And it may seem unjust the way that he did it, but it had to be done, and it was going to happen this way. There was no choice. So plead the ancient rights in vain. It would be like pleading for the First Amendment when speech is necessarily stopped. Right? And you know, you can think of the American Civil War in this context too, to help you understand what he's talking about. You probably all learned in high school that Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus in the Civil War, which was contrary to justice and contrary to the whole premise of democracy. And he also issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which was illegal. Right? He didn't have the authority to do that, but he did it anyway, because this was war, and you have to do these things. Right? Nature that hateth emptiness allows of penetration less, and therefore must make room where greater spirits come. Right? So the burden of these 10 or 12 stanzas is to say there was nothing we could do about it. Cromwell was coming. He's a force irresistible, and our job is to live with it and make the best of it. So he's both supporting Cromwell's position and admitting that it is contrary to English values and even contrary to justice. He's a force of nature. So with that, I hope you can get through more of the poem. It's much longer than this. It's 3 slides here, and I'm not going to go through all of this. If you're confused, you might want to read up a little bit on the English Civil War. I'm sure you could pull up a Wikipedia article or something to give yourself a little background. Okay, so let's go to the second ode. I'm going to let you finish that one on your own. And the Ode on Solitude is pretty easy, so we're going to go to the Wordsworth Ode, the Intimations Ode. It's always called that. Its real title is Intimations of Immortality Through Recollections of Early Childhood. And that full title really tells you everything that the poem is about, right? An intimation is a hint. Right? So it's a hint. Hint at the reality of immortality through memory of childhood would be a translation of the title into more contemporary English. But, you know, this is an ode. It uses high-sounding language. It uses very formal language. So Wordsworth would much rather use the fancy word intimation than the simple word hint. However, this is not a Horatian ode. The stanzas are irregular and vary from one to another. Right? So the lines, some long lines, some short lines. My slide didn't really do it justice. You know, the word stream is actually at the end of the first line. So the trick to this poem is to read slowly and carefully and make sure you reconstruct the sentence as a sentence. That's how you understand what he's saying. Odes are particularly cognizant of the kind of strategies that we have for reading language in general. In other words, you read an ode more like you read a paragraph than like you read other kinds of poetry. So you always have to read the sentences of a poem. But odes are logical, and they present an argument. And you have to be able to follow that just the same way you have to follow the argument if you're reading an essay. There's also, in this ode, a story. Something is happening to the speaker as he speaks. The speaker is essentially the poet. It's not literally autobiographical. He's making up the scene, but it's his sensibility and his beliefs that he is illustrating. So, first stanza. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. Right, so that's where the first sentence ends. So there was a time, right? And that time was childhood, when these natural things, the meadow, the grove, and the stream, as well as the entire earth, and every common sight. A common sight is a sight that's available to everybody. He's thinking specifically of things in nature. To me did seem apparelled in celestial light. You know, that's old language. Dressed in heavenly light would be a less formal way to say that. So there was a time when I was a child when all these natural things seemed to have heaven shine through them. That's all he's saying there. The glory and freshness of a dream. Right? That's just a gloss on what celestial light means. It is not now as it hath been of yore. So I'm no longer experiencing this glory and this dream. We've got to switch, because he's not a child anymore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. So when I look at trees and streams and meadows and groves and stuff, I no longer see that celestial light. It no longer has the glory and the freshness of a dream. It just seems like trees and stuff. So he's going to illustrate that idea in the second stanza. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look round her when the heavens are bare. Waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth. So things are still pretty. I still enjoy looking at nature. All of these things are true. The rose is lovely. The rainbow, I see that. I acknowledge the beauty of the rainbow. Waters on a starry night are beautiful. The sunshine is a glorious birth. I enjoy the morning. I enjoy the sun shining. It's all wonderful. But it's not what it used to be. But yet I know where'er I go that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. Right? So I used to feel this glory or experience this glory, and now I don't. Now while the birds thus sing a joyous song, and while the young lambs bound as to a tabor's sound, to me alone there came a thought of grief. A timely utterance gave that thought relief. And I again am strong. The cataracts blow their trumpets from the steep. No more shall grief of mine the season wrong. I hear the echoes through the mountains throng. The winds come to me from the fields of sleep, and all the earth is gay. Land and sea give themselves up to jollity, and with the heart of May doth every beast keep holiday. Thou child of joy, shout round me. Let me hear thy shouts, thou happy shepherd boy. So he's starting to feel a little depressed in the second stanza, because he looks around at trees and they're pretty, but they're not what they used to be. So now he tries to buck himself up. Let me not let my bad mood ruin the beautiful day. Right? So he says, while all these great things are going on, birds are singing and the lambs are jumping, and I'm the only one, to me alone there came a thought of grief, and this is the thought of grief. Right? It's this thought, these two lines. That's his thought of grief. A timely utterance gave that thought relief. Now, what is the timely utterance? Well, it could be these lines, or it could be just something that he thought of, something that somebody said. It's been suggested that he's referring to a poem maybe that he wrote. Whatever it was, someone said something, and now he feels better. I'm not going to ruin this beautiful day with my depression. So that'd be a pretty short poem if he stopped right there, and not worth too much. But he's going to try to continue to hold his good mood up here, Ye blessed creatures, I have heard the call, ye each to other make. I see the heavens laugh with you in your jubilee. My heart is at your festival. My head hath its coronal. The fullness of your bliss, I feel it all. O evil day, if I were sullen while earth herself is adorning this sweet May morning, and the children are culling on every side, in 1,000 valleys far and wide, fresh flowers. Children are culling fresh flowers in 1,000 valleys. So how dumb of me, how useless of me to be sad in the midst of all this joy. And the babe leaps in its mother's arm. I hear, with joy I hear. But there's a tree of many, one, a single field which I have looked upon. Both of them speak of something that is gone. The pansy at my feet doth the same tale repeat. Whither is fled the visionary green? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? Back to the words he used in the first stanza. I felt the glory and the dream. So he's trying to buck himself up, but it's not working. But this is beautiful, but I'm still disturbed that I can't experience that joy that I experienced years ago when the tree was the light of God. So it didn't work. By the fourth stanza we see it didn't work. So here are some of his most famous lines ever. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. This is pure Plato. When we are born, we fall asleep, and we start to forget. But the soul that is born with us had elsewhere its setting. In other words, we don't begin our life at birth. We existed somewhere else before we were born. And that soul that we were came into existence at our birth. Not an entire forgetfulness, and not an utter nakedness, naked of flesh, of course, but not naked of glory. But trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy, before we've completely forgotten, before we've lost the glorious close of our origin in heaven. We exist on earth. Shades of the prison house begin to close. That's the prison house of materiality, of earth, of flesh and blood. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, and he beholds the light and whence it flows. He sees it in his joy. So this is the process of forgetting where you came from, forgetting the heaven that you used to live in. The forgetting takes time. You still experience it as a boy. So he's explaining how come in the first stanza he used to see the glory, and how come he doesn't now. It's something he has forgotten through time away from it. The youth, who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest. Right? The east is where he comes from. The sun rises in the east. His birth is characterized by the east. And by that vision splendid is on his way attended. At length man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. So by the time you're a man, you no longer experience the joy of boyhood, and that joy is a sign that you pre-existed. Okay? So that's probably as far as I need to go. This one is 6 slides long, but with that much, you might be able to see as you go through it on your own, that the poet is coming to grips with what he has lost by being an adult and what he can learn from remembering what he experienced as a child. Very philosophical. And that's why it's an ode. That's the sort of poem that you write this kind of thing in. And you would never do this as a song. Okay, so let's move on to Gray's Elegy. This is one of the most famous elegies in the English language. The only caveat I have in giving it to you is that it's not a normal elegy, in that it's written in a graveyard for a whole town of dead people and not for an individual. Elegies are usually written for individuals. Tennyson's In Memoriam poem, you've read one stanza from that, is an elegy for his friend Arthur Henry Hallam. And Break, 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 also by Tennyson, is also an elegy, also for Arthur Henry Hallam. These are poems to deal with the grief of a friend who's died. This one is an elegy because it's written for dead people, but it's not for an individual. So, now this is written in the country churchyard. It probably wasn't, but it was inspired by visiting a country churchyard. I can't imagine staying in the churchyard long enough to write this long poem. The difficulty of this poem is mostly just in the old language. The thoughts are complex, and you could almost call this an ode if it wasn't more obviously an elegy. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. Well, it just means that the bells are ringing and it's time to go to bed, time to go inside. The lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lea. The cows are coming home. The plowman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. So everyone's going home, even the cows are going home. So I'm the only one here. Now fades, here in the churchyard. The churchyard is a graveyard. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight. In all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. And so the tinklings are the bells of the sheep. So he's just describing the scene around him, the sounds that he hears. And you know, everything's still except for the beetle and the bells and the sheep, or the cows. Save, so to repeat this, to accept, except everything is still except the beetle and the bells, everything is still, save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower the moping owl does to the moon complain, of such as wandering near her secret bower molest her ancient solitary reign. So the stillness is broken by the three things: the beetle, the bells, and the owl. Beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. So a hamlet is a little town. So the elms and the yew tree are the trees in the cemetery. In England, yew trees are often planted in cemeteries. It's a cemetery tree. When you want to invoke a cemetery in a poem, you always mention the yew tree. Where heaves the turf in many a moldering heap because of the coffins that are decaying under the ground, so the earth collapses. Each in his narrow cell forever laid, each of the forefathers is forever laid in his narrow cell and sleeps. Notice the mood that Gray is creating, the heavily end-stopped lines. It's an important notion in poetics, the pause at the end of a line. Pauses in the end or in the middle of a line which is called caesura, we've gone over that, are always important in poetry. Right? It sets the mood. The breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from the star-built shed, the cock's shrill clarion or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lonely bed. And so, none of these things. These are things that wake people up, but they're not going to wake these people up. For them no more the blazing hearth shall burn, or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield, their furrow oft the stubborn glebe has broke. How jocund did they drive their team afield, how bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke. And so these are the things that they did in life. They harvested, they broke the ground, they pushed the plow through it, they cut down trees. None of this is going to happen anymore. Their children are not going to climb on their knees anymore. Let not ambition mock their useful toil. So here he comes to his evaluation of this. Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely days and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. Ambition is what made Cromwell great. There's no Cromwell here. Don't think less of them because they were not famous, because they didn't have great ambition. Don't mock them because they're just dead country people, right? Because their work was useful. Don't let ambition destroy or obscure their homely days. Don't let their destiny, their fate, to be just nameless people in a cemetery, allow you to think less of these people. Nor grandeur hear a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. Don't let grandeur hear with a disdainful smile. Right? So grandeur is greatness, and don't look down on them disdainfully if I tell you the story, the simple annals, the story of the poor. So he's elevating these nameless, ordinary people in the cemetery to the subject of poetry. Elegies are usually written for people like Cromwell or William Butler Yeats. These are ordinary people. So just the idea of writing an elegy for these ordinary, nameless people is a little bit odd. And he knows that, but he says they're important people even if they're nameless. I'm going to not read the next few stanzas, I think, because he goes along in the same vein for the next few stanzas. And I'm going to actually jump to this stanza here. Their name, their years, spelt by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and eulogies supply, and many a holy text around she strews, that teach the rustic moralist to die. So their name, their years, spelt by the unlettered muse, the illiterate poet, the illiterate inspirer of poetry. We're going to be giving the common elegy for these common people in the common language. Right? So the place of fame and elegy supply. Right? So my elegy is going to show where they ended up. In many holy texts around she strews, she being the muse or the elegy, that teach the rustic moralist to die. For who, to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being ere resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast a longing, lingering look behind. So no matter how poor and common and ordinary you are, who hasn't looked back on his or her life and missed the goodness, the good things, missed the life, right? You might have a hard life, but you look back and you think, I would do that again. On some fond breast the parting soul relies. Some pious drops the closing eye requires. E'en from the tomb the voice of nature cries, e'en in our ashes live their wonted fires. So, Gray is suggesting that we owe these people a lot. They kept life going for us, and all of their lives were important. For thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, doth in these lines their artless tale relate, if chance by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire my fate. So he wants, again, to bring you to thoughts of the deaths of ordinary people. That's a very rough paraphrase, but that's, I think, all you need to know. Haply some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away, to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. There at the foot of yonder nodding beech, that wreathes its old fantastic roots so high, his listless length at noontime would he stretch, and pour upon the book that babbles by, the brook that babbles by. Right? So these are just memories of these people. Right? And it's going to end with an epitaph that sums up everything that he talks about in the poem. And I did miss something that I wanted to point out. Well, that's a little bit of passage. Here we go. I'm not going to go too far, but I want to note that we mentioned Cromwell here, we mentioned Milton there, mentioned Hampden there. These are all important people in literary history, political, military, and poetic. And the point of this section of the poem is that the people here might well have been great if the opportunity had been afforded them. It's not their fault that they were not great, but history just didn't need them, and so they didn't rise up to it. So, poor people are just as important and just as much the subject of an elegy as rich and powerful people, is his argument. And that's, in a few words what he's talking about. There's a lot of detail you can go in with this, way more than we'll have time for. But I'd be happy to see you develop some of these things I pointed to in the discussion. All right, I promised one more, and it's Browning's My Last Duchess. So this is dramatic monologue. The difficulty of this poem is following the thoughts, the sentences of the Duke in whose voice it is given, because he's trying to manipulate the person that he's talking to. And we might get caught up in that manipulation. Everything you need to know is presented here, but it's not presented in a straightforward way. It's presented by an evil man who's trying to manipulate somebody, and that somebody is the servant of a count whose daughter he wants to marry. So everything here is a con. By an evil man. I mean, this man belongs with people like Hitler. I mean, he's an evil man. But you don't know that when you start reading it. You know, you've got to piece all these things together. So I want to go through it with a suggestion of how you piece these things together. That's my Last Duchess painted on the wall. See, that's all you know right now. So you wonder, who has a Last Duchess? Well, probably a duke, but it could be anyone in the dukedom who has a Last Duchess. Last can mean final, or it can mean most recent. We don't know yet. We have to kind of hold these ideas suspended as we go through and try to figure out which of the possible meanings is actually meant here. Looking as if she were alive. Okay, so now I know the Last Duchess is dead. We don't yet know for sure that it's a duke who's saying this, but that's certainly a likely possibility. I call that piece a wonder now, and that now is very important, suggesting that he didn't always call it a wonder. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Both please you sit and look at her. So the authority with which he talks suggests that this is the Duke. That was the most likely explanation, and we can already be pretty sure that's who's speaking. And he's speaking to somebody that he's trying to show a painting of his former wife to, and he asks whoever he's talking to sit. I said Frau Pandolf by design. Right, so he had some reason to mention the name of the painter. For never read strangers like you, so now we know he's talking to a stranger. That pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. Or so now we know that the painting stays behind a curtain, and no one gets to look at it unless the Duke shows it to them. So this Duke is quite controlling, at least of this painting. And so you've got to ask why. Why does he hide this painting behind a curtain? Why is no one allowed to look at it unless he shows it to them? That's an unusual thing to do with a painting. But everybody who looks at this painting turns to him and seems as they would ask me if they durst, if they dared. So this is a formidable Duke. This is someone that you don't necessarily dare to ask a question of. And seemed as they would ask me if they durst how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. But notice he asks without saying anything. So the question is, how did that face, how did that earnest glance get into this painting? Sir, 'twas not her husband's present only called that spot of joy into the Duchess' cheek, for something else made her blush besides my presence. What was it? Now a lot of people think it must have been infidelity, but that may not be borne out in what we see following. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. So these casual statements by the painter made her blush. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. So there's no suggestion of infidelity. It was just an idle compliment of the painter. Think of a photographer taking fashion photos and trying to get the smile he wants on his model and giving her compliments. Right? And the painter's doing the same sort of thing. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. So, again, no suggestion of infidelity here. She likes everything. She's easily impressed. Sir, 'twas all one. Didn't make any difference as far as she was concerned. My favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool brought in the orchard for her, broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. Well, there you go, right? She blushed when I entered the room, when I complimented her, but she blushed when some idiot gave her some cherries, some nobody. She thanked men, good. It's good that she thanked men. But thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So it's good that she thanked people, but I have no idea how she could have thanked someone who gave her a bunch of cherries with the same enthusiasm that she thanked me for my gift of a 900 years old name. I made her a duchess, and though she was grateful for that, she was no more grateful for that than she was for the cherries the idiot gave her in the garden. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, which is ridiculous because he's giving us what an extraordinary speech right now. Even had you skill in speech to make your will quite clear to such a one, and say, just this or that, and you disgust me. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. So who could go to such a person and say, you're disappointing me, you're doing things that I do not approve of? Now it's possible if you did that, he says, that she would understand and reform. It's possible that she would resist and say, don't be ridiculous. But even if she didn't resist and say, don't be ridiculous, even if she did exactly what you said, just the idea that you would have to tell her means you've lowered yourself. And I don't lower myself. If she doesn't just know that my gift of a 900 years old name is better than a bunch of cherries, then something must be done. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her. But who's passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. So instead of saying, stop acting like a ninny, he had her killed. She no longer offended him now because she's dead. Will it please you rise? So the person he's talking to, which we will find out is the servant of accounts, is probably scared, shaking in his boots right now. I mean, this is a veiled threat. Why does he tell this story? And why do you admit to murder? We'll meet, this is why, we'll meet the company below, then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. So I've said this before, the generosity of your master, the Count, is all that's necessary for me to know that whatever I ask for in dowry with his daughter, I will get. If I ask for £1 million, he'll give me £1 million because he is a generous person. But of course, the truth is that we know to get the money, he's going to threaten the life of his proposed next duchess. Then to finish the sentence, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Now that's just a bald lie. Right? He says, I'm not in this for the money, I just want his daughter, but I'm going to ask for money because we kind of have to, save face and all. And then something happens that you have to see. Nay, no, we'll go together down, sir. The servant tried to run ahead, no doubt to warn the count that he's going to marry his daughter to a madman. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse. Thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. And so then the Duke acts as though we were just looking at nice paintings. You know, here was my wife, and now look, here's my Neptune taming a seahorse. Now, there's more to it than that. There's more to this poem than I have said, but that's the basic story. And the key is to listen carefully and imagine what must be happening for these words to be spoken. Ulysses is much easier than this poem, but this is a better poem than Ulysses, in my opinion. This is the best dramatic monologue ever written, and Browning was the reason that we talk about dramatic monologues today as a separate form of poetry, because he did so many so well. All right, that's plenty. That's longer than usual. Good luck.